We come together at a key moment in time when the role of religion is center stage. There was a stage, I think 20, 30 years ago, where the thesis was that religion was going to become less and less important as people grew up. As we realized what wonderful people we were, we didn't need God, and religion would fade into the mists of time. Well, how wrong that secularization thesis was. We live in a world where religion is center stage, and not always for good reason. As we had our moment of silence today, people motivated by a warped understanding of faith. But there is, as we know, a positive reservoir of faith, of what God wants to happen in his world. And our discussion today is really, how do we make that happen? I just wanted to give you a little bit of background that next week, this has been a great week for the Salvation Army. I have to say to you, my mind is very much focused on next week, when I will be in Washington, D.C. at a very interesting meeting at the World Bank. 120 people have been invited, hosted by the president of the World Bank, Dr. Jim Kim. And it's a third faith leaders, a third academics, and a third policy people. So government policy, USAID, DFID, NORAD, those sorts of big aid agency government people. Have a dialogue around how does religion help and contribute to the fight against extreme poverty. And then at the end of next week, another meeting of the UN agencies, meeting again to discuss how does faith contribute. So this is a very, very live topic, and we have a good introduction and opportunity today. So let me quickly give you the structure. We're going to have, in a few moments, a message from former Prime Minister Gordon Brown. He wished he could be with us today, just his diary did not permit it. There's a very large meeting next week in Oslo, all about the Up for School campaign, which he and Sarah Brown have been leading. And but he will speak for us for about 10 minutes. And then I'll introduce to you what happens next. So let's start by listening to Gordon Brown, who will now speak to us. Thank you.
I'd like to congratulate the Salvation Army on 150 years of service, of contribution to the community, of making a difference. And I would like to thank all of you individually for the service you give, the contribution you make, the dedication you show, the difference that you have made to the lives of millions of people, not just in this country, but around the world. The great Indian leader Gandhi once said, if you're in any doubt about what you should do, recall the face of the poorest, the most vulnerable person you've ever met, and you'll be in no doubt where your duty lie. And I believe that over 150 years, this is exactly what the Salvation Army has done, helping those who cannot easily help themselves, helping those people in the greatest need, giving people hope, and giving people the sense that they can make a difference in their own lives in the same way that the Salvation Army is making a difference through the way you live your lives. And I want to talk today about the most needy people in the world, the people who are the most vulnerable, those who are lost without the help that we can give. And I'm referring to the 58 million children of primary school age who are not even given the chance to go to school in this world today. We take it for granted in most countries that every single child has the right to education. But around the world, even in the year 2015, despite all the commitments we've made that every child should have the right to education, there are more than 30 million girls who are not at school and nearly 30 million boys. And these are girls and boys who sometimes are in the worst possible situations, but who could be rescued if we could make sure they had a school place. 10 million children who are married at school age against their will, forced into marriages under laws in some countries and practices in some countries that are simply barbaric. 15 million or so children under the age of 14 who are forced into work, who instead of being at school are having to go out and in some cases making almost no wages for their family in doing so. And then there are the 500,000 girls and boys who are trafficked every year. And we see this most recently after the earthquake in Nepal, where the state radio of Nepal is broadcasting messages warning parents that those children who are on the streets because of the earthquake are in grave danger of being taken and seized and taken from Nepal into India, trafficked by people sellers. And then, of course, we have the girls who are discriminated against simply because they're girls. Malala, the young girl in Pakistan who took up the case of girls and their right to education and then was shot by people who would not admit that in the modern world every child should have the right to go to school, but particularly girls should never be discriminated against. And these are the young girls and boys that we're trying to help get into school. And we need your support in making sure that the world knows that in 2015 it is completely unacceptable that there are boys and girls who are denied that basic right to education, and even if they are at school, in many cases to be denied the right to be literate because the courses and the classes are not good enough. And that's why we're running a petition up for school, a petition that is encouraging millions of people around the world to sign up, hopefully to be the biggest petition that's ever been done, hopefully with the signatures not just of yourself but of the many people you've asked to help us. And I want to thank the Salvation Army for what you have done to raise people's awareness that this petition is one that can be signed and can make a difference, and when sent to the United Nations can remind people that they've made a pledge that every child should be at school, but we're not yet honouring it. And yet for a small amount of money, in some cases only $200 per year per child, we could honour that commitment. Now, I've been going around the world to try to make governments in countries where there are so many children out of school aware of what needs to be done. I went to South Sudan, which is one of the most troubled countries in the world. The newest country because it became a separate state, but a country that is in the midst of a civil war. And I went to meet some of the children in a village just outside Juba, which is the capital city of South Sudan. And I went into a group of young women who were girls and who had been married very early and who had children. And I asked them what were their dreams for their children and what did they want most of all. And I might have thought they would have said shelter, and I might have thought of said as refugees, people who'd run from one country to another, they needed food and nutrition and healthcare. But they said that most of all they wanted for their children the chance of education. And then I went to the only village school that existed, a small one classroom hut. And in that classroom, there were only around 20 children. The classroom was itself, as a prefabricated hut, too small to house any more children than that, with the 2 teachers they had and the very, very small collection of books. But you know, my abiding memory of being in that classroom in Juba, outside the capital city, was this, that outside, and there were 2 portal windows that you could look into the school, there were more than 100 boys and girls standing, looking inside to an education they couldn't have because there was simply not enough school classroom places for them. And I then went to meet a mother, and that mother had twins of 8, and she told me she'd had to make a choice about which of the 2 twins could go to school because there were not enough places for all the children in that small village. And that's just one example of how thousands and then millions of children are being denied the chance to offer education, and where we can actually do something about it by our efforts. And so I also went to Abuja in Nigeria, the capital city, and I went to a school outside Abuja. And funnily enough, when I arrived there, so too did Bono, the famous pop singer. And he was visiting Nigeria, and he had been directed to this school. And you know, this school was run by aid agencies, money provided by us, but it was dilapidated. It was falling apart, corrugated iron roofs, no computers, no desks, children sitting on the floor. And yet, when we talked to the children and asked them, as you do, what do they want to be? Someone said they wanted to be an engineer, another an airline pilot, someone a doctor, someone a nurse, someone a teacher. Nobody wanted to be a politician, of course. And to Bono's surprise, nobody wanted to be a pop singer. But these children were being denied the right to the best education that we could have given them because the standard of the school facilities was so bad. And then I found out that the school was losing pupils. And it was losing pupils to our madrasas up the road, preaching an extremist brand of religion, telling children that violence was one way to get their aims in the future. And because we were not doing enough ourselves, these children were now prey to extremist influences in the heart of Nigeria, one of the reasons why we have some of the terrorist problems we have today. So it's important to us for security reasons, but it's also important for morality, that we provide the opportunities to education for young children who are without. One of the great things I managed to do was to entertain Nelson Mandela when he had his 90th birthday party in London. And it was a celebration of his work, but it was also, as befits Nelson Mandela, a demand that he had that we help him finance a children's hospital in South Africa to deal with some of the black children who were not getting proper medical attention at that time. And what Nelson Mandela said that night was that his message was one of hope for the future, one of hope that having climbed one mountain in his life, that he'd ended apartheid, he was now climbing another mountain, and that was to end child poverty, by giving young children the opportunity for health and education that they were so sadly without. This is the great moral mission of our time. We have neglected the needs of so many children in different parts of the world, so that there are more than 20 million child refugees who are without the chance of any education at the moment. We have fought for big causes in the last 50 years, but this cause remains to be one that is achieved. And that is the right of every child in the modern world to go to school. We can be the first generation in history where every single boy and girl goes to school. The first generation to achieve the goal of universal education. But we cannot achieve it without your help. I do ask you, in all the work that you already do, to put the cause of children's education around the world across to the many members and supporters and followers that you have. I do ask you to continue this great work that you've embarked upon, asking people to sign the petition that will be given to the Secretary General of the United Nations. Together we can make a difference. The Salvation Army has dealt with so many evils over the years and removed them by the great efforts of your members. I hope that together we can remove and eradicate yet one more evil from the world, because in the Christian future that I know you want to see, every child matters and every single child counts. Thank you very much.
All the social activity of the Salvation Army is the outcome of the spiritual life of its members. Amen. All social service must be based on the spiritual, or it will amount to little in the end. Social justice is at the very core of who we are. It's not simply a convenient add-on or something that sounds nice in the press. It's at the very core of who and what we are as an organization. And perhaps the final point in answering the why. There is but one Salvation Army. One army, one mission, one message. There is no social services of the Salvation Army and an evangelical Salvation Army. The lines are rightly blurred. That is what makes the Salvation Army unique and why the Salvation Army was called into being. We live in a world where people of faith are sometimes, and there are reasons why, treated with suspicion, sometimes marginalized, unfortunately increasingly persecuted, discriminated against because of deep-held personal beliefs. The harsh realities of the world, and not least of which has been the catastrophic world wars in the last century, but also the ongoing violence, the suffering, the disease, the death in the world today, seems to have knocked the stuffing out of people of faith. We've seen so many evidences as we've been in the main arena and looking back at our history, how people of passion with a fire burning in their bellies went out and they did make a change in the world. Perhaps, therefore, the first thing we need to say is we need to recapture some of that vision. We need to capture some of that passion. And we need to get off our backsides and we need to get out there and we need to be doing something. I believe that we should be engaging effectively with others in this area in fighting for social justice. We should not think that because we are a global movement, because we work in 126 countries, because we have so many sophisticated programs around the world, that we can do this on our own. What we are doing around the world, great though it is but a drop in the ocean. So we should be engaging with others. We can't do it on our own. And I think we should be more bold and proactive in reaching out to form strategic partnerships. I see one emerging with the World Bank, and I'm interested to see where this journey takes us. I hope it will be a mutually enriching journey. But one of the geniuses of William and Catherine Booth was the recognition that we need to engage with others, and we need to engage others in our fight. Thirdly, for a long time, people of faith have been marginalized in the realms of politics, and yet I sense that the tide is fast turning, because many politicians around the world are realizing the importance of faith in the world in which we live, and that we need to engage in dialogue. They see the importance and the positive influence of faith. The fact that faith does make a difference in our world. And I believe that we are at a time when our political masters are reaching out to the faith community, and we should be willing to engage in that debate. We shouldn't shy from that. Why can't we also reach out to people of other faith communities? I could go on all afternoon, and I know my time's already gone, but I've seen some wonderful examples. Places like Pakistan and Indonesia, where people of other faiths can sit around the same table and share hopes and dreams for a better world. And we should be working with them to build that. I do believe that we can effectively engage in issues of social justice by strengthening our own accountability. And that's where the rubber hits the road, my friends. It's one thing pointing fingers at governments and telling them what they've got to do. Let's do some housekeeping as well. I'll say no more. But I think we can show accountability in that area. I think sometimes as well we have been so preoccupied in helping people who've already fallen off the cliff. And I know there are people who work themselves into early graves, doing all that we can to serve suffering humanity. But perhaps we need to do more in engaging in policies, engaging with governments in developing policies to prevent people falling from the cliffs in the first place. So perhaps more engagement in legislation, policy design. And we're making a few timid steps in that area. But I think we do need to move away from just treating symptoms. We need to look for long-term solutions. And I'm seeing evidence of that happening in the Salvation Army. Great programs happening in the United States. If you want to Google Pathway to Hope, have a look at what they're trying to do there. I think there are some interesting avenues for us to look for. Many of our Salvationists are well connected and could assist us with engaging with governments, local authorities. And I think the impact of our mission would be far greater if we learn to collaborate with others in strategic partnerships, both external and internal. But the last point I made, I think a lot more could be done at the grassroots level. We are now in danger of being removed from the people we seek to serve. And I think we need to get back, and we need to get out of our buildings and to be a vibrant part of the communities that we serve. So in conclusion, I see this issue as being central to who we are as Salvationists. Because still today, 150 years after the founding of the Salvation Army, we are a people who are driven by our deepest spiritual values. And we need to keep that central. But this is a time that we should, as a matter of urgency and highest priority, seek to address the needs of the poorest people living in extreme poverty. And so in doing, we need to take a look at our programs, to see how the focus confirms that commitment, to consider what should change or improve to enable us to achieve that goal. If we're to succeed, though, we've got to work together. We cannot do it alone. And so I pray that we will be people who go out and will engage with society, with people of goodwill, and that together we will work to bring something of heaven here on earth, because God knows we need it. Thank you.
In 2005, I was working for the British government in Tanzania, and Gordon Brown made his first trip to Africa. And as a fairly junior diplomat overseas, I was tasked with organising his programme. And I took him. Is there anybody from Tanzania in the audience, actually? No, okay. That's good, I get my geography slightly wrong. So we took him to Dodoma, which is the capital and centre of Tanzania. And I took him to a village which we'd already been to scout and meet people. And there was a large party with him, a lot of officials. And we'd found an individual called Paulo, who I became quite friendly with over a period of time, who had HIV and AIDS and TB. And Paulo was exactly the same age as me, give or take a couple of months. And I'm a fairly hefty 12.5 stone, for people who were guessing while I'm away. And Paulo was 7 stone and couldn't hold his food, didn't have enough food, and didn't have the drugs at the time that he needed to combat HIV and AIDS. And we sat down and talked about it, about his story. And Gordon Brown came in, and he was meant to stay for 20 minutes, because it was a very hectic programme, as you can imagine. He was the Chancellor at the time. And he was in there for an hour, with 2 people talking to Paulo, translator and himself. And he came out with tears in his eyes. And I have to say that hitherto that point, we hadn't been sure how he would connect with this agenda, with the development. He referred to Paulo probably 4 or 5 times over the next 2 years in his speeches. And we got a couple of emails from his office asking how Paulo had fared. And that was, so that for me, I have a degree of faith, if you like, within Gordon Brown's motivations for the things he talks about, and I've seen how he gets connected to these things. The good story was Paulo was able to access drugs. Food is crucial for taking HIV drugs, so his calorie count was up. And I actually know he's still alive, and in a rotund 12.5 stone, like I am now, actually, to be honest. That's got nothing to do with what I was meant to talk about, so sorry about that. I'll have to cut this my speech down. I'm very proud to be here. It's a tremendous event. I wasn't quite sure. When I first saw the speech, the 750 people, I thought, okay, that's a few people in the O2, it's quite a large venue. And then I saw 15,000 of you here as I tried to make my way to meet the General for lunch. It's tremendous. And I love the different ranges of dresses, particularly around African colleagues who are over. It's a stunning tribute to the success of your movement. And I'm very proud to be here on behalf of Jim Kim and the World Bank. It's a pivotal year, 2015, so it's timely for you to reflect on where you've come from and where you're going. We have the Financing for Development Conference in Addis coming up in July, and I'll come back to them. We have the new Sustainable Development Goals being decided in New York in September, and then we have the pivotal climate change event in Paris called COP21 in December. For the next 15 years, people will look back on this and say whether for humanity writ large, whether we made the right decisions or not. Organisations like yourselves have a key role to play in that, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But Financing for Development at Addis is all about donors, private sector, multilateral organisations coming to the table with finance to support developing countries with their own poverty reduction plans. The Sustainable Development Goals, which I'll call the SDGs, are the new set of development goals which the world will align behind to reduce poverty and tackle the inequalities that Gordon Brown was just talking about. And climate, I don't need to go into it. It's fundamental to everything that we do. It's not about Africa, it's not about the West, it's about how we live on the shared planet, which at the moment is taking quite a battering from our activities. The World Bank has 2 clear goals, which President Kim introduced in 2013. To eliminate absolute poverty and to reduce inequality. Now let me just explain those a little bit. So we want to eradicate extreme poverty. That's the number of people living on $1.25 a day. We want to get that down to 3%. You cannot get it lower than that, our statisticians and others tell us, because you'll always have a residual conflict in places that leaves people in poverty. But if we can get it down to 3%, that would be a tremendous achievement by 2030. Reducing inequality, this is the key thing. So in every developing country in which we work, we want to improve the economic livelihood of the bottom 40%. So rather than just driving economic development, we want to see that the bottom 40% are benefiting disproportionately going forward. This is going to be a real challenge. It's something the bank hasn't grappled with before, but it's fundamental to achieving the first goal.